What if the letter that promised you a new life was the lie that changed everything? Mary Louise Whitmore stepped off the train into the burning heat of Red Mesa, Wyoming, her heart beating fast with fear and hope tangled together. She had traveled for 3 long days, leaving behind the quiet sadness of Massachusetts. She carried only one small trunk and a letter pressed against her chest. The letter said she had been hired as a bookkeeper for a wealthy rancher named Colt McGraw. The job was her chance to start over, to be more than a burden to her distant relatives. But the West did not welcome her kindly. The dust rose up in thick red clouds clinging to her dress, her skin, even the inside of her mouth. Men stopped talking when they saw her step onto the platform. Their stares were sharp. Some curious, some unkind. The women looked no softer. Hard faces, strong hands, eyes that judged her in one long, sweeping glance. Mary Louise held her shawl tighter even though the sun pressed down like a hammer. She searched the small crowd for a man who looked like someone who handled ledgers and numbers, but no one fit the picture she held in her mind. Then she saw him. A tall man stepped from the shadow of the station building. He was broader than any man she had ever known. His shirt clung to strong shoulders, and a gun belt sat low on his hips. His face was tanned and stern, carved by sun and wind. His storm-gray eyes locked onto hers, studying her with a silent judgment she could not escape. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his deep voice carrying easily through the dusty air. "Yes," she whispered. "Are you Mr. McGraw?" "I am." He looked at her for only a moment longer before lifting her trunk with one hand as if it weighed nothing. He led her to a buckboard wagon without another word. The ride to the ranch was long, quiet, and filled with a strange heaviness. The land stretched out forever, wide and wild. There were no soft green hills, no gentle gardens, no safe corners. Only open sky and endless prairie, a place where a person could vanish without a trace. Mary Louise tried to speak, to make some polite comment, but the vastness swallowed every thought she had. Colt McGraw did not seem to need words. He looked ahead, guiding the wagon with practiced hands, his eyes always watching the horizon. Only once did he speak. "Antelope," he said, pointing to a flicker of movement far away. Then silence again. When they finally reached the ranch, Mary Louise felt her breath catch. The house was large, strong, and built with purpose. A full working ranch stretched around it, barns, corrals, fencing, cattle moving in the distance. It was impressive, but it was not warm. It felt like a place built by a man who expected everything to break and prepared himself for the damage. Inside the house, she felt the emptiness even more. No curtains, no rugs, no pictures, just clean, bare walls and a heavy silence that pressed on her chest. Colt handed her a tin cup of cool water. She drank gratefully. Then she finally asked the question she had been holding inside. "Mr. McGraw, your letter said you needed a bookkeeper. If you could show me the ledgers, I can start at once." He turned away from the fireplace slowly. "The ledgers are in order, Miss Whitmore." She stared at him. I don't understand." "There is no bookkeeping job," he said, his voice steady, his eyes unreadable. The cup slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Her heart hammered painfully. "You lied to me. Why would you bring me here under false promise?" His jaw tightened. "Because I needed a decent woman to come to this ranch without being judged. My wife died 2 years ago. My niece lost her parents last winter. She needs a mother. This house needs a woman. I need a wife." Mary Louise stepped back, her breath coming fast, fear wrapped around her like cold hands. She had heard stories, terrible stories, about girls lured west for reasons far darker than work. "You brought me here to marry you?" she whispered, horror rising in her throat. "It is not a demand," Colt said. "It is a choice. I will pay your fare back east. You may leave on the next stage. Or you may stay and make a home here." That is all." Quote. His offer hung in the air like a heavy weight. The truth hit her in one crushing wave. She had nowhere to go, no money, no family who wanted her back, no future waiting for her in the East. Here, in this vast and lonely land, she was trapped, not by Colt's hand, but by the life she had left behind. Tears filled her eyes. "You cheated me," she whispered. Colt's expression shifted for the first time. A flicker of regret softened his harsh features. "Perhaps I did, but I am not a cruel man, and I will not force your hand. You choose." Mary Louise stared at the door, at the world beyond it, at the empty plains where a girl alone could vanish without a sound. And in that moment, she made a choice that would change everything. She stayed. The first morning Mary Louise woke on the McGraw ranch, she understood she had entered a world that cared nothing for fear, pride, or weakness. The sun was barely rising when she stepped into the large kitchen. The ranch hands were already filing in, hungry and silent. She had never cooked for more than herself, yet now a dozen rough men sat waiting for breakfast. Her biscuits were hard as stones. The bacon burned or drooped half raw. The coffee tasted like bitter water. Jed Boone, the ranch foreman, poked a biscuit with his fork. It shot across the plate and clattered onto the floor. The men tried to hide their smirks, but Jed's deep rumble of amusement filled the room. "Looks like we're in for lean days, boys." Mary Louise's cheeks burned. She felt like a useless burden, standing in a kitchen she didn't know how to command. Jed stood and took the skillet from her hand without a word. He cooked quickly and efficiently, saving the meal she had ruined. Colt watched from the doorway but said nothing. His silence stung more than any insult. After the men left for work, he pointed to the untouched plate she had made for him. "Eat!" She forced down the leathery bacon, each bite heavy with shame. Life settled into a harsh rhythm. Mary Louise fought with the stove each morning, burned her hands, ruined dough, and splashed hot water on her skirts. By evening, she fell into bed exhausted. Every skill she lacked hung over her like a heavy shadow. And then there was Abigail. The child moved through the house like a small ghost. Quiet, watchful, always clutching her rag doll. She never cried, never smiled. She only stared with wide gray eyes that looked too old for her young face. Mary Louise tried to speak to her, to smile, to reach out. But Abigail always slipped away like a frightened fawn. It hurt more than any failed recipe. A week passed. Colt rode into town for supplies and insisted Mary Louise come along. The ride into Red Mesa brought a flood of stares and whispers. Women hissed behind their hands. Men lifted their eyebrows. "That's the one," she heard a woman say. "McGraw's mail-order bride bought her like a mule." The words hit like a stone to the chest. Colt's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His silence felt like agreement, like he saw her the same way. Back at the ranch, Mary Louise cried quietly into her pillow, careful not to be heard. But something hardened inside her that night. Not anger, not bitterness, determination. She would not be the Eastern doll they mocked. She began to fight for her life here. Small victories came slowly. The first time her biscuits were soft. The day the milk cow let her work without kicking. Jed Boone even gave her a brief nod after tasting a stew she had practiced for days. But the moment everything changed came with the sky turning purple and the wind screaming across the plains. A terrible storm rolled in without warning. The wind howled like a wounded beast. The rain came in sideways sheets that stung her skin. Thunder cracked loud enough to shake the walls. Colt burst through the back door, drenched in rain. "The north stable door is tearing loose. If it goes, we lose the whole wall. I need help." Jed and the other hands were out on the range. There was no one else. Fear shot through her, but she swallowed it down and grabbed a coat. She followed Colt into the storm. The stable was chaos. The huge door slammed wildly, one hinge already twisted. The wall groaned with each blow. The horses inside screamed in fear. "Hold the lantern!" Colt shouted. She gripped the lantern with shaking hands as he fought the wind, trying to pull the door into place. The gale was too strong. It shoved him back, slamming the door hard enough to send splinters flying. He stumbled. She saw it then. He could lose this battle, and the ranch would suffer for it. Mary Louise set the lantern down in a sheltered corner and grabbed the loose rope. "What do you need me to do?" she shouted. Colt stared at her, shocked, then pointed. "When I push the door in, pull the rope around that post. Pull with everything you have." He shoved his shoulder against the massive door. Inch by inch, the storm fought him. Rain beat against him like 1,000 needles. "Now!" he yelled. Mary Louise pulled the rope with all her strength. The rough fibers burned her hands. Pain shot through her arms, but she held on. Colt's hands came over hers, adding his strength to hers. Together they pulled until the rope held tight. The door stayed. The wall held. The storm raged around them, but inside the small circle of lantern light, something shifted. Colt looked at her differently, not like a burden, not like a mistake, but like an equal, a partner. Her hands throbbed raw and bleeding, but she didn't look away from him. His storm-gray eyes softened. For the first time, she saw respect in them, real respect. The storm outside was violent, but the storm inside her heart was stronger. Something had changed between them, something they both felt, even if neither spoke it. In the days that followed, the house changed too. Jed no longer mocked her. The ranch hands waited patiently for her meals without complaint. Colt began showing small signs of care she didn't know how to interpret, bringing her salve for her hands, fixing the loose window latch in her room, stopping to look at her a moment longer than before. And then Abigail changed. One morning, Mary Louise found a single wildflower placed beside her plate at breakfast. She followed the trail of shy eyes to the doorway where Abigail stood. It was a small, delicate gift, but it opened something deep inside her. Later that day, Mary Louise sat by the cold hearth and began reading aloud from her childhood book of fairy tales. She read not to Abigail, but to the room. She read softly, letting the words fill the silence. At first, there was nothing. Then she sensed a presence. Abigail sat quietly on the far side of the room, listening. The next day she sat closer. The next day closer still. And one afternoon when the story ended, a small whisper came. "Can they get lost again?" Mary Louise's heart filled with warmth. "Yes," she said gently, "they can get lost. And they can find their way home." Abigail nodded, scooting closer, her small hand brushing against Mary Louise's skirt. Something fragile, soft, and hopeful began growing between them. A new family was taking shape. But trouble in the West always comes like a shadow. And the shadow had a name. Silas Kane. His arrival would break the fragile peace and push Mary Louise into a storm far worse than the one that tested her strength. A storm that would force her to choose between fear and love, between safety and the man she was beginning to care for. Silas Kane arrived in their lives like a snake sliding out from under a rock. One afternoon in Red Mesa, he cornered Colt and Mary Louise outside the general store. His slick smile held no warmth, and his dark eyes lingered on Mary Louise in a way that made her skin crawl. Colt's jaw tightened, and he positioned himself between them, his hand settling firmly at the small of her back. It was the first time Colt had ever touched her with clear, possessive intent. Kane pushed for Colt's northern land strip again, the one he'd demanded for months. Colt refused. Kane's smile slipped, his eyes hardened, and from that moment, trouble began. A fence cut, 30 cattle gone, a breeding bull mysteriously crippled, a watering hole fouled. Kane wasn't stealing. He was trying to break the McGraw ranch piece by piece. Mary Louise watched the tension rise in Colt, like a slow-building storm. The men rode armed. Jed Boone grew grim. Abigail grew quieter, sensing danger in every shadow. Mary Louise tried to keep the child busy with lessons and stories, but she felt the weight of fear in the air. Then came the fire. The night sky glowed orange. The hay barn, their entire winter feed, was a pillar of flame. Colt and the men fought like demons to save what they could. Mary Louise worked beside them, soaked and coughing, buckets burning her hands. She dragged burning logs away from the house with a fire hook, her face inches from heat that could have ended her life. When dawn came, the barn was gone. The cost was enormous. Colt's fury burned hotter than the fire had. "I'm sending you and Abigail east," he told her, his voice raw. "It's too dangerous here." "No," she said, the word firm and fearless. "My home is here, my family is here, and you face this with me." Not alone. Something in Colt broke open. He pulled her into his arms, his forehead resting against hers. "You're right," he whispered. "Forgive me. We stay together." Their peace lasted 3 short days. Then Abigail vanished. Mary Louise had been sewing on the porch while the little girl played by the creek. One moment, Abigail's sunbonnet bobbed along the bank. The next, it was gone. Panic gripped Mary Louise. She raced to the creek, calling Abigail's name until her throat tore. All she found was the child's rag doll lying in the dust. Her scream brought Colt running. He saw the doll, saw her face, and something inside him turned to iron. Cain had taken the child. A message soon arrived, tossed into the yard by Cain's rider. "Bring the deed at midnight, come alone, or the girl dies." Colt gathered his men, ready to wage war. Mary Louise sat in the silent kitchen, clutching Abigail's doll, her heart split open with terror. Colt's fury was righteous, but blind. If he stormed that saloon with guns blazing, Abigail was as good as dead. Mary Louise knew one truth. A father went to fight, a mother went to save. And this was a mother's fight. While Colt and the men prepared for war, she slipped out the back door, saddled her gentle mare, and rode hard toward Red Mesa under the thin moonlight. Fear chased her every step, but love pushed her forward faster. The saloon glowed warm and loud when she stepped inside. Every head turned. Silas Cain's smile spread like oil on water. "Well, well, McGraw's little bride." Mary Louise ignored him. Her eyes scanned the room until they found Abigail in a dark corner guarded by a hired gun. The child's face was pale, streaked with tears. Mary Louise stepped forward, voice calm, steady, unshakable. "I'm here for the girl." Cain laughed. "You? You have nothing I want." "I have a warning," she said. The room stilled. "You think Colt McGraw is coming to negotiate for land. You have no idea what you've done. You didn't steal cattle. You stole his heart, and he is coming to bury you." Cain's smile faltered. She walked closer. "But I am giving you one chance to live. Let the girl go, now, or pray that Colt kills you quickly." A ripple of unease went through the room. Then the saloon doors blew open. Colt stood there, Jed and the riders behind him, rifles ready. The gunfight erupted like thunder. Men dove for cover. Bullets shattered glass. Smoke filled the room. In the chaos, Mary Louise ran straight for Abigail. The guard raised his gun, but Mary Louise smashed her heavy revolver across his wrist, sending the weapon flying. She grabbed Abigail, pulling her behind her. Cain lunged, grabbing her arm, trying to rip Abigail from her grasp. "No!" Mary Louise screamed, holding the child with all her strength. A shot cracked. Cain staggered, his shoulder blooming red. Colt stood 10 feet away, smoke curling from his pistol. The fighting died quickly after that. Cain's men surrendered or were dragged outside by Jed. The saloon was a ruin of broken glass and splintered wood. Colt holstered his guns and walked to Mary Louise and Abigail. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. He simply gathered both into his arms, holding them tightly against him. "You saved her," he whispered to Mary Louise. "You saved all of us." The ride home was quiet. Abigail slept in Mary's arms, safe at last. In the soft glow of the ranch house, As dawn touched the horizon, Colt cupped Mary Louise's face in both hands. His voice was low, thick with emotion. "I thought I brought you here because I needed a wife. I was wrong. I brought you because my heart knew you before I did. I choose you, Mary. Not for a season, not for a moment. I choose you forever." He reached into his vest and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple gold ring, warm with age. "My mother's ring," he said softly, "meant for the woman I couldn't live without." Tears filled her eyes as he slid it onto her finger. A week later, with fresh rain pouring life back into the prairie, they stood outside their home and spoke their vows. Jed Boone stood proudly as witness. Abigail tucked wildflowers into Mary Louise's hair. Colt held her hands as he whispered promises carved from the deepest part of his heart. And when he kissed her, it was with the truth he had carried for so long. She wasn't the woman he brought here by a lie. She was the woman he chose by love. Chosen forever.